Today is March 26th. Welcome to Big Book Daily. My name is Rob. I am an alcoholic. It's a thrill, honor, and joy to be here with you today as we journey through the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous and the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions. Today, out of the Big Book, we're going to be reading personal story number 7. This is pioneer number 7, The Man Who Mastered Fear, pages 247 through 251. And out of the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions, we're going to be reading pages 94 and 95 today. So with all that, my friends, hope you're doing well today, and let's get right to the good stuff. All right, my friends, so if you remember from yesterday's reading, our seventh pioneer here, he has these very, very severe fears, irrational fears, and he has really no support for his mental health right now. And the one thing that he has done is self-prescribed alcohol, would seem to calm down his fears for a little while. But as he said at the very beginning of his story yesterday, then eventually he has two main problems. One is fear and the other one is alcohol. So obviously it does turn on him here. So we are going to build on that idea. We're actually starting on page 248. I apologize. I thought I said 247 earlier. We're starting on 248 and we're going to read up to 251 today. All this changed when I was 30 years old. My parents died, both in the same year, leaving me, a sheltered and somewhat immature man, on my own. I moved into a bachelor hall. These men all drank on Saturday nights and enjoyed themselves. My pattern of drinking became very different from theirs. I had bad, nervous headaches, particularly at the base of my neck. Liquor relieved these. At last, I discovered alcohol as a cure-all. I joined their Saturday night parties and enjoyed myself too. But I also stayed up weeknights after they had retired and drank myself into bed. My thinking about drinking had undergone a great change. Liquor had become a crutch on the one hand and a means of retreat from life on the other. The ensuing 9 years were the Depression years, both nationally and personally. With the bravery born of desperation and abetted by alcohol, I married a young and lovely girl. Our marriage lasted 4 years. At least 3 of those 4 years must have been a living hell for my wife, because she had to watch the man she loved disintegrate morally, mentally, and financially. The birth of a baby boy did nothing to staying the downward spiral. When she finally took the baby and left, I locked myself in the house and stayed drunk for a month. The next 2 years were simply a long, drawn-out process of less and less work and more whiskey. I ended up homeless, jobless, penniless, and rudderless, as a problem guest of a close friend whose family was out of town. Haunting me through each day's stupor, and there were 18 or 19 such days in this man's home, was the thought, where do I go when his family comes home? When the day of their return was almost upon me, and suicide was the only answer that I had been able to think of, I went into Ralph's room one evening and told him the truth. He was a man of considerable means, and he might have done what many men would have done in such a case. He might have handed me $50 and said that I ought to pull myself together and make a new start. I have thanked God many times in the last 16 years that was just what he did not do. Instead, he got dressed, took me out, bought me 3 or 4 double shots, and put me to bed. The next day, he turned me over to a couple who, although neither was an alcoholic, knew Dr. Bob and were willing to drive me to Akron, where they would turn me over to his care. The only stipulation that they made was this: I had to make the decision myself. What decision? The choice was limited: to go north into the empty pine country and shoot myself, or to go south in the faint hope that a bunch of strangers might help me with my drinking problem. Well, suicide was a last straw matter, and I had not drawn the last straw yet. So I was driven to Akron the very next day by these good Samaritans and turned over to Dr. Bob, and then the tiny Akron group. Here, while I was in a hospital bed, men with clear eyes, happy faces, and a look of assurance and purposefulness about them just came to see me and told me their stories. Some of them were hard to believe, but it did not require a giant brain to perceive that they had something that I could use. How could I get it? It was simple, they said. And they went on to explain to me, in their own language, the program of recovery and daily living that we know today as the 12 steps of AA. Dr. Bob dwelt at length on how prayer had given him release, time and time again, from nearly overpowering compulsion to drink. It was he who convinced me, because his own conviction was so real, that a power greater than myself could help me in the crises of life, and that the means of communicating with this power was simple prayer. Here was a tall, rugged, highly educated Yankee talking in a matter of course way about God and prayer. If he and these other fellows could do it, so could I. When I got out of the hospital, I was invited to stay with Dr. Bob and his dear wife Anne. I was suddenly and uncontrollably seized with the old paralyzing panic. The hospital had seemed so safe. Now I was in a strange house, in a strange city, and fear gripped me. I shut myself in my room, which began to go around in circles. Panic, confusion, and chaos were supreme. Out of this maelstrom, just two coherent thoughts came to the surface. One, a drink would mean homelessness and death. Two, I could no longer relieve the pressure of fear by starting home, as was once my habitual solution to this problem, because I no longer had a home. Finally, and I shall never know how much later this was, one clear thought came to me. Try prayer. You can't lose, and maybe God will help you. Just maybe, mind you. Having no one else to turn to, I was willing to give him a chance, although with considerable doubt. I got down on my knees for the first time in 30 years. The prayer I said was simple. It went something like this. God, for 18 years, I have been unable to handle this problem. Please, let me turn it over to you. Immediately, a great feeling of peace descended upon me, intermingled with a feeling of being suffused with a quiet strength. I lay down on the bed and slept like a child. An hour later, I awoke to a new world. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had changed. The scales had dropped from my eyes, and I could see life in its proper perspective. I had tried to be the center of my own little world, whereas God was the center of a vast universe of which I was perhaps an essential but very tiny part. It was well over 16 years since I came back to life. I have never had a drink since. This alone is a miracle. It is, however, only the first of a series of miracles that have followed one another as a result of my trying to apply to my daily life the principles embodied in our 12 steps. I would like to sketch for you the highlights of these 16 years of a slow but steady and satisfying upward climb. Wow, absolutely beautiful stuff. I cannot wait to come back to this in just a minute. All right, my friends, so today out of the 12 and 12, we are finishing up step 10, which is continue to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. And throughout this chapter, we've talked about self-restraint, lowering our expectations of others, getting into the regular habit of doing our different types of inventories here, and promptly admitting when we're wrong. And yesterday we read, here we only recognize that we did act or think badly, try to visualize how we might have done better, resolve with God's help to carry these lessons over into tomorrow, making, of course, any amends still neglected. And yesterday we talked about step 10 in the big book as well, what we can do when we are taking this inventory. One of the main things that I tried to express yesterday, just for my own sake, is be careful not to drift into worry or self-centeredness when we're going through this, because then we're of no use to anybody. So we are going to finish off step 10 by reading pages 94 and 95 today. Second paragraph on page 94. But in other instances, only the closest scrutiny will reveal what our true motives were. There are cases where our ancient enemy, rationalization, has stepped in and has justified conduct which was really wrong. The temptation here is to imagine that we had good motives and reasons when we really didn't. We constructively criticize someone who needed it, when our real motive was to win a useless argument. Or, the person concerned not being present, we thought that we were helping others to understand him, when in actuality our true motive was to feel superior by pulling him down. Sometimes we hurt those we love because they need to be taught a lesson, when we really just want to punish. We were depressed and complained when we felt bad, when in fact we were mainly asking for sympathy and attention. This odd trait of mind and emotion, this perverse wish to hide a bad motive underneath a good one, permeates human affairs from top to bottom. This subtle and elusive kind of self-righteousness can underlie the smallest act or thought. Learning daily to spot, admit, and correct these flaws is the essence of character building and good living. An honest regret for harms done, a genuine gratitude for blessings received, and a willingness to try for better things tomorrow will be the permanent assets we shall seek. Having so considered our way, not omitting to take due notes of the things well done, and having searched our hearts with neither fear nor favor, we can truly thank God for the blessings that we have received and sleep in good conscience. Beautiful. Doing this right before bed, I think that could really help. My family and I, we practice the thank you gods. We need to do it more often. Gratitude really helps. But golly, talking about some of these motives, I have done some of these things that 12 and 12 says, these, when you dig deeply enough, why did I do what I did? What's the motive? Be honest about it. It's just between you and God. And be honest. I've done this one. Were we depressed and complained we felt bad when in fact we were mainly asking for sympathy and attention? I've done that one a few times. This one nails me to a T. We can really be self-centered in a lot of ways. And this is where we have to really be honest and go, wait, what's my motive here? Oh, that's a selfish motive. God, please forgive me. Help me to change my mindset. And I love this part here on top of 95. Learning daily to spot, admit, and correct these flaws is the essence of character building and good living. This is a daily thing that we can put into practice, and it's going to take a lot of practice to undo some of these pattern behaviors. An honest regret for harms done, a genuine gratitude for the blessings received, and a willingness to try for better things tomorrow will be the permanent assets that we shall seek. So honesty, gratitude, and willingness, they are big parts of step 10. Absolutely love this chapter. And going back to our friend's story here, so he meets Dr. Bob, and they are very, very hospitable to him and invite him over to their house. And all of a sudden, that good old fear comes back. And this person doesn't know what else to do. It's either suicide or he prays. It says, having no one else to turn to, I was willing to give him a chance, although with considerable doubt. I got down on my knees for the first time in 30 years. The prayer I said was simple. It was something like this. God, for 18 years, I've been unable to handle this problem. Please, let me turn it over to you. So finally, that's the admission of powerless right there. He can't handle the problem. And he finally turns it over to God. Immediately is the next word. A great feeling of peace descended upon me, intermingled with a feeling of being suffused with a quiet strength. I lay down on my bed and slept like a child. I have read that before. There's been a couple of other pioneers of AA in these testimonies we've read in recent weeks that they said immediately, I slept like a child. Now in my mind, I want to say Bill Dotson was one, where that almost the exact same line was said. After, finally admitting I can't do this, there's this great rush of peace. realizing, oh, I don't have to carry this anymore. An hour later, I awoke to a new world. And in italics, remember what we said about those italics? Nothing had changed, and yet everything had changed. The scales had dropped from my eyes, and I could see life in its proper perspective. I had tried to be the center of my own little world, whereas God was the center of a vast universe, of which I was perhaps an essential but very tiny part. Just a beautiful, beautiful description of a spiritual experience here by our friend. Once again, miracles do happen. This poor guy, and my heart breaks for him. His wife and child left, and that easily could have been me. My wife could have left with my, at the time, 2-year-old son and my newborn baby daughter. I was that close to losing them both. Or them all, excuse me. And that's what happened to this guy. His wife left and his baby boy. And I think about that pain that he must have felt, and loneliness and everything, and he doesn't know how to stop. And then all of a sudden, the God of my understanding seems to intervene in his life. There must have been something that happened to our friend long before this happened, because he admits to one of his friends his real problem, and one of his friends just happens to know somebody who happens to know Dr. Bob. And instead of giving him $50 and saying, hey, good luck, man, try better, he puts him in contact with this couple, and this couple puts him in contact with Dr. Bob. Dr. Bob lays out the program, is hospitable enough to have him over, and sure enough, our friend has a spiritual experience in their home. I don't think that's an accident. That's just me. It sounds like a miracle. And if you're not drinking today, that is a miracle as well. Thank you so much for listening. It is an honor and a true joy just to be here today, just to be alive, just to be sober today. And honestly, I want to practice those things in the 12 and 12. The honesty, the gratitude, and the willingness to change. I want to practice those 3 things today. Speaking of gratitude, I'm grateful you're here. Thanks for being this lifeboat of recovery with me. I don't speak on behalf of AA or anything like that. I am just a grateful guy in recovery, and I sincerely look forward to seeing you back here tomorrow.